webinar. I'm sorry for the delay in starting the webinar. However, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Beverly McLaughlin, and I'm the Head of Marketing at Sannam S4. I'd also like to introduce, first of all, Bettina Kavanagh. Bettina has lived and worked in Indonesia for many years. She runs her own B2B market research agency in Indonesia, in Jakarta. And Bettina taught Sannam S4 with its international clients who are looking to move into Indonesia. So Bettina, welcome.
Hello, Beverly. Good evening.
I'd also like to introduce Matthias Viggers. Matthias has a wealth of experience in consumer branding and also in FMCG. He was a former board member and marketing director of Friesland Campina in Indonesia. He currently runs his own communications consultancy in Jakarta. So Matthias, welcome to you. Moving on,
thank you, Beverly.
As we go through, no problem. Moving on, as we go through the webinar, if anybody has any questions, viewers or listeners, please use the question bar, the messaging tool at the bottom of the screen. We'll endeavour to answer as many questions as we can online. If we can't do that in the time frame, then we will certainly email you directly. So without further ado, Indonesia. Indonesia is, to many, classed as the jewel in the crown of Southeast Asia. It's the largest economy. It spans 17,000 islands and over 500 languages spoken across the width, breadth and depth of Indonesia. It's the fourth most populous country, having 240 million inhabitants. However, since 1998, the path to democracy has been rocky. Nonetheless, international organisations are moving in their droves into Indonesia, and many others are beating the path. So my first question, Bettina, is to you. Thinking about 2015 Indonesia, and from a macro perspective, what does that look like to international organisations?
Thank you, Beverly. I think I would just like to start with the politics before I get into the macroeconomics, because that is the driving force of economy and what is happening at the moment. So Indonesia, as you said, is 16 years into the democracy. It is one of the fastest and most peaceful transitions of any democratic countries in the world. And it's used as one of the role models for other countries like Afghanistan and Iraq and others. So we actually have three branches. We have the executive, so we have the president and the vice president that are elected by the people. We have the legislative, and we also have a judicial. The judicial is very important because it actually can overrule any decision made by the executive and the legislative. So last year, we got a new president. So President Joko Widodo, he's known as Jokowi. He's the 7th president of Indonesia. He is a political outsider. He came from a city in central Java. He was a furniture manufacturer and a businessman, small scale. And he's risen up to be the president of Indonesia. What he brought was this huge expectation that he could bring a new governance and a break from the past. So we have a break from the political elite, and we're going to have something new. And it was really the people's power. He was put as the new hope. And he's been here about 9 months now. And so he's done two massive policy moves that are going to dictate the economics. So he's actually scrapped the fuel subsidies. So he's going to be saving about $16 billion a year. I say about because there will be a small subsidy, and so we don't know until the end of the year. He's also introduced a new welfare system. So for the first time ever, Indonesia is having a welfare. So that's for health, for the poor, and also for the education, and that's going to be $5 billion. These two policy moves are something that other governments have tried and never succeeded. It brought down Suharto in 1998, and every other government has not been brave enough to take off fuel subsidies. And he did it within about 3 months of him coming into power. This will probably be his legacy. Unfortunately, everything is not so positive, and we have a few negatives at the moment. And so he is actually seen as a puppet because he's a political outsider. So the ex-president actually brought him on board. So many people see him as the puppet for her. So that's the picture on your left. He's also started a new saga. We call it The Crocodile versus the Lizard, season 3, because we've already had 2 of these seasons. So this is where the police are fighting with the anti-corruption body. So the president actually nominated only one person for police chief on the day that the anti-corruption body did him for corruption. So we then had a month of where the police were arresting the anti-corruption body, and it was like a complete soap opera. And the president just sat back and did nothing for at least a month, 6 weeks. So he's been seen as ineffective. So we have tweets like, SDY, who is the last president, all is forgiven. Please come back and help clear up the mess. Likewise, the New Hope has turned into the Hopeless. And you can see the pictures on the right-hand side. So are getting suspicious that he can't actually run the country because he is the outsider. We also have problems where he doesn't actually read the regulations he's signing. So one headline was, Joko, I don't read what I sign, and he'd given lawmakers a huge budget for cars. So the people are getting growing concern. This is coming through into the economy. We've just gone through 100 days. So on the right-hand side, you can actually see a report card where they went through the streets carrying his report cards, where he actually failed. He got 1.8 out of 4. What he's done very well in is on national security. So he has a minister called Minister Susie, and she's managed to blow up a few foreign fishing boats, and so that's seen as very good. Also in terms of law, he's got C+, and that is the executions. But where he's doing very badly is in the economy, he got a D, and also in agricultural policy, he's got an E. Going forward, what we're going to see is very much what we've got at the moment. We won't get any new regulations come through Parliament because he has a minority. But this is actually a bad thing because Indonesia doesn't need any regulations. What we need is to implement what we've got and reduce bureaucracy and corruption. And that's what he wants to go and do. So although he could be politically weak, he could actually be very good for what Indonesia needs at this point. Which brings me to the economy. The Indonesian economy has performed extremely well. It's $900 billion. It probably would have been a $1 trillion economy if it wasn't for the exchange rate. Unfortunately, it has slid down, so we're just going below the 5% growth in the end of last year and the moment. And it's likely to stay low for the time being. Partly this is due to politics. So this is due to Jokowi coming through and his policies and also other issues. But I think we need to put the 5% growth in perspective. It is very, very high compared to a lot of other countries, and as in Europe, would be overjoyed to have a 5%. So even when I'm saying we're dropping down to 4%, please take that in perspective. It is still very, very high. One of the key issues being for Indonesia has been the decline in the rupiah, which has actually tumbled about 52% in the last 3 years. So anyone who's importing got a 50%, it's more expensive for them to pay. And this is having effect on business confidence. So you've got a weak president, you've got the rupiah sliding 52%, and it's still sliding. And there's also concerns, commodity prices, oil prices, which Indonesia is very strong in, sliding. So at the moment, we have business confidence just dropping below 100. Not very far below. We're still at like 2009 when we had a slight dip. So it could equally come back up again. So we're not definitely in panic motions, but we're having a slight decline at the moment. But where we are actually very good is the consumer confidence. It is extremely high. We're still sitting at about 112. 100 is the magic number. So anything above 100 is very positive. And we have been up at 120, and it's one of the most confident consumers in the world. And so they are spending. And so my colleague later will talk about the consumer sectors that are of importance. So that's a little bit of a snapshot in the economics. In social, just to remind people, Indonesia is the 4th largest population in the world. We've just hit 250 million people. It's the largest Muslim population with 205. What is interesting is 57% of the people live on one island alone. So it's the one at the bottom there, it's with Jakarta on it, and another 21% live on the top left-hand island. The rest, 25% live on the other 17,000 islands and are very distributed across the place. What interests everybody about Indonesia is the middle class. So this year we're going to have 150 million middle class. That is up from only 3 million in 2004. So in the last 10 years, we've got 147 million new middle class consumers. And that is why a lot of companies are saying, wow, we have to be in Indonesia. Where else can we find 147 million new customers? We haven't got it. If you look on the right-hand side, you actually see from the yellow bar, we were at the moment, we're in the poor and aspirant, and you will see by the 2019-20, we'll be sitting up more in the middle and upper middle class. So this is where we're moving up the chain. This is something that surprises a lot of people, and a lot of people always think that Indonesia is a very poor country and we're very lower middle class. That unfortunately or fortunately is very, very wrong. Indonesia will have 161,000 millionaires. That is the same as Hong Kong in 2019 and just a little bit behind Russia. Likewise, in billionaires, there's going to be 56 in 2020 in Thailand, Philippines, and Singapore combined. So Indonesia does have wealth, so you don't need to just come here for the middle class. You can also come here for the affluent as well, because Indonesia has a very sizable population in that area. But in terms of percentages, of course, they always look small, and that's why people often overlook it. Previously, I mentioned that Jokowi had brought in the new welfare system. So just a little bit on that. It was only launched in November 2014, and it's going to help up to 90 million, so about 35% of the population. It's going to cost 5 billion. I say going to cost because we don't have that many people enrolled just yet, because it's only 6 months old. So it's actually going to have 3 components. In healthcare, it's going to target up to 88 million people. And this will mean by the end of the decade, everybody in Indonesia will have health insurance. If your company doesn't pay for it, the government will pay for it. Admittedly, premiums are only going to be $2 a month for the government, but it's going to be the first time that Indonesians have had health. Likewise, we have a welfare card. Again, small, is going to target about 17 million families, and they will get $20 a month if their income is less than $100. Likewise, the government is very eager to keep people in school, so they will give students from the poor families, they will give them money to stay in school. So it will range from about $45 up to $100, depending on the level of education you are. So this is a new step for Indonesia. We are bringing in welfare. It is still small, but it is something that's going to open up. So it's going to be a lot of exciting sectors in both healthcare and education later on, and also consumers. Lastly, technology. Indonesia does it very well in the traditional sense, because in terms of factories and productions, China and India and Europe, America does far better than us. But what Indonesia has is we are the social media capital of the world. There's 69 million Facebook users, which is the 4th in the world, and there's 29 million Twitters, which is number 2 in the world. So anything to do with social media, Indonesia wants, and they are desperate for it. They want anything new, and anything in that sector is a very buoyant. In terms of smartphones, there's 75 million smartphones this year, and there's 140 million internet connections. So anything in terms of anything to do with social media, Indonesia has got hunger for. So whether it's new apps, whether it's internet, smartphones, anything. Lastly, I think we can't close this evening without talking about infrastructure, because Indonesia has notoriously got a bad infrastructure. It takes hours to get home. Even last night, it took me an hour and a half to drive 2 kilometers. This is actually going to change. So in stopping the fuel subsidies, the president actually wants to invest a lot of money into infrastructure. So he plans over the next 5 years about $70 billion will go into infrastructure, of which about 70% is going to come from doesn't have the money. So the president wants to move us from being the 80th tier up, and getting closer to our peers of Thailand and other countries. So he wants to see electricity go from 80 to 90%, which means, of course, we need to have new electricity capacity. Clean water, he wants that to increase up to 100%. 24 new airports, 15 new ports, over 2,600 kilometers of roads, and 3,500 kilometers of new railways. So this is where a lot of private sectors, the government is trying to entice the private sector to come in and to give Indonesia what it needs. Because at the moment, the lack of infrastructure is knocking off 1% every year of GDP in Indonesia. So if they can restructure and improve the infrastructure, we will be able to grow the economy 1% faster than we are at the moment. So automatically we'll be on at 6, 7, or even 8%, which would drive the economy. So I think in the macro, that's where I would like to look at. But in terms of micro and everything else, I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Bettina. So just thinking about the consumer confidence for starters, what sectors are buoyant, therefore, and particularly would be of interest to the international organisations moving in? Which are the key sectors that you would regard as the most buoyant in Indonesia right now? Matt, could you take that question, please?
If we look at a developing market, what is always growing and where it's all demand is, of course, in the food sector, in the fast-moving consumer goods, and that's also a sector which has been growing already in the last couple of years. What is new for that, and that's what Bettina already said in her presentation, what is going to be very rapidly growing in the coming years is the healthcare. With the introduction of this new social security system, all the pharmaceutical companies are jumping into the market and investing big time, because healthcare spendings will go up and will easily double or triple in the coming 2 or 3 years. And then, of course, the retail and consequently the fast-moving consumer goods, like I said before, those consumer sectors will keep on growing with a steady growth. Infrastructure is a sector, of course, that will be growing, although that's a lot more difficult sector to get into, because it's very strictly regulated. There are always deals being made in terms of aid from foreign countries, and these foreign multinationals can help or not. Bettina?
I think I would agree with you there.
Please continue, Bettina.
I think I would agree with you that infrastructure is tough, and I think we need to put it in perspective that we have something called a private-public partnership, the PPPs, and at the moment they're only 3% of the total infrastructure investment at the moment. So the government wants to increase it from 3 to 70%, which is an enormous task. So they've actually gone and changed or revised the land acquisition laws to make it better. Whether it's going to happen, it's too early to say, but they are making moves in the right direction, so that land acquisition can take less than 583 days that was currently taking. And also the private sector can invest and make sure that they get their money back. But it's still, we're only 2-3 months after the regulation has been passed, so it's still early days.
Okay, thinking back to consumer goods, Nat, and thinking back to the first generation, which the professionals, the young, the aspirant classes, which are the ones that are driving growth in Indonesia. And equally thinking about comparing Indonesia to the markets of China, for instance, and India. Just to give you some context to this question, in China, for instance, anything that is an international brand is valued. Obviously, over recent years, there have been changes moving away from and I'm thinking in terms of the premium brands and in terms of apparel, for instance, away from the bling brands to maybe a more sophisticated branding, which the Chinese consumers are now engaging with based on the maturity in the market, I would imagine, as compared to, for instance, a market like India, where for international brands, it's a very different story. The culture, the history, the richness of Indian culture is something that is very much revered and treasured by the Indian population. And that means that international brands in India have to engage, if you like. And particularly, I'm thinking here in the consumer, apparel, premium end of the market. How does that look like for Indonesia? How would you compare Indonesia in that regard?
It's a kind of mix in between those two, actually. I think a lot of international have a lot of aspiration by the middle class. Certainly, if we talk about technical features like Apple and Samsung and the likes. But if you really want to get into the day-to-day consumer lives of consumers, and food is always a very difficult item to come in as an international one. Like Coca-Cola is not really a success in Indonesia because of the taste and the carbonation. McDonald's was a success in Indonesia, but they only became successful by changing the main dish from burgers to rice and chicken. And that's the main thing, that 80% of what McDonald's sells in Indonesia is rice and chicken. So that shows that you have to adjust your international brand quite very rigorously if you want to have a success in Indonesia. Yeah, for sure the aspiration is there, but you have to adjust to the local culture in a very well way.
Okay, thank you. I'd also like to ask a question, because I know that there are many education listeners tuning in today. And so these are institutions that are looking into the fast growth markets such as China, Indonesia and India for potential opportunities for them. So can you share some light in terms of what the educational market looks like in Indonesia, and particularly at the higher education end?
Should I take that one? Education,
Bettina,
this
would
is
you
an
like to
interesting.
take that?
Yeah, this is an interesting topic, because when Jokowi became president, he actually focused on education a lot. So he's actually split the ministry into two. The education ministry has now been split. So you have got primary and secondary education with one ministry, and now tertiary education is moved across to research and technology, because they want to increase the importance of that. Likewise, they've also changed the rules in terms of primary and secondary. So at the moment, we don't have any international schools anymore. So on the 1st of Jan, international came out. But we have something called joint cooperation schools. So this will be where schools can actually cooperate with overseas schools. Likewise, in tertiary education, at the moment, there's about 36,000 students studying abroad. So it's about 0.8% of Indonesian students are overseas. In 2012, they did actually change the law, so they did allow foreign universities to come into Indonesia. They can set up a branch. They have to cooperate with Indonesian universities. They need to be non-profit and they need to hire Indonesian lecturers. Then they are permitted to come into Indonesia. At the moment, not many foreign universities, if any, have actually come in and set up a branch. What they're wanting to do is they work in tandem with a local university. And so students can do a joint degree. So they'll do 2 years in Indonesia and then go across and do 1 or 2 years in Australia or in America. So that's where we're seeing more universities coming in. Monash University from Australia, Melbourne, is very active in that. And a few other good reputable Australian universities are up here and giving joint degrees. So that's where we're seeing it. But education is going to be a big focus. We now have 12 years compulsory education. Students are given money to stay in school. So if you can't afford it, you will be given money. It's still little, so $45 to $100. Tertiary will be getting $100. So it will pay for their books and at least to keep them their clothes and their books to stay in university, so not having to go out to work. So they are wanting to move people into the education, but it is going to be a big growth sector over the next 10, 20 years.
Okay, thank you. We have some questions relating to construction and engineering from companies who are listening in today. And one of the key questions here is, bearing in mind the infrastructure developments that are afoot in Indonesia, how feasible is it for international organisations to successfully win these contracts? Matt, could you help us with that one?
That's in the private sector where we talk about multinationals or even big local companies who are building new factories. Or doing infrastructural projects, there might be some chances. Although normally that's also within conglomerates and a lot of joint venture-like structures with local companies, etc. If we talk about infrastructure for the government, that's often you need to have a very good network, of course, first, but also a network of joint ventures with local joint ventures, because there are absolutely limitations how far you can be involved. So if you want to go for infrastructural projects and aiming to this big government project where they're aiming for, you need to allow yourself a lot of time to set up well and build your network and get in there step by step. And I can guarantee you it's going to be a very difficult and long road. Bettina, you know it better?
I think so. I think I agree with you, but I think also what companies need to do first is there's something in Indonesia called the negative list. So they actually need to see which of their sector that they want to come into, if they are on that list or not. So for something like architecture, there is a lot of restrictions for foreign architecture firms. They can't set up in Indonesia. So what they do is they're still here, they're still designing buildings. Don't get me wrong. But they will be operating from Singapore or joining with a local partner. So one of my key recommendations is always look at the negative list and see where your sector fits into that negative list. But then there's always ways in Indonesia. So even if you find it on the negative list, there's usually a way to get around it. You just need to find the way.
Okay, thank you. So
you need a good lawyer, and he will help you to find the way.
Okay, thank you. So just moving on and thinking about ease of doing business. If one looks at the doing business rankings, the world rankings, Singapore is usually ranked as #1, with Indonesia usually pegged at around the 120th position. China is classed now as an easier place to do business, and that's pegged at 90, with India ranked as potentially a more difficult place to do business at 142. Bearing in mind that Indonesia is pegged as the 120th easiest place to do business, which means it seems to be a very difficult place to do business, what do you think are the key barriers to entry for businesses and thinking of entering Indonesia? Bettina, can I ask you that question?
There's many barriers to Indonesia. Some have been they've been here for a long time, and some of them are newer ones. So the first one is probably the cultural issues, culture and language, and a lot of foreign companies don't understand the cultural issue, and then they're not very successful. There is a classic case where there was an American telecommunication company that came in on, we call it a KSO, so a joint operating scheme, with the national telecom, and they thought, well, we know best, we'll be able to do this. What happened was the telecom employees all stopped work, and there was no telephone lines ever built. And it actually had to be taken over by the government, and that was just due to lack of cultural understanding of how to work with Indonesians. In that, when we were doing the telecommunications, the one country that did very well was actually the French and the Japanese. They managed to work with the telecommunication company, and they were the ones that actually managed to get some lines done. So that's on one level, you've got the culture. I think in other areas, you've also got the bureaucracy. It takes time to get anything done. When I first came here, it took a lot longer. You used to have agents to do anything for you, from setting up a company to getting your work visa, to even, we used to always have a taxman coming around the office asking for us to buy a book that probably cost $50, which is basically a donation because we'd bought it the year before. We're seeing that disappearing. So now you can apply to set up a company. You set up directly. You're not allowed to use agents. You can go in and get work permits without using agents. And the taxman doesn't come around asking for unauthorized payments quite as frequently. I'm not saying they won't come, but they're definitely coming less frequently. Another one that I see, and it affects all of us, is infrastructure. People are less productive in Indonesia because they spend hours in traffic jams. I mean, it could take some of my staff 3 hours commuting one way and then 3 hours going home again. Likewise, getting a container through the ports can take 8 days compared to only 1 day in Singapore. So these are some barriers to actually working in Indonesia. I think that might have some more barriers.
Matt, do you have have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, there are a few improvements, like Bettina already said. The investment proposals at the or National Board for Investment, the BKPM, is going a lot faster and a lot better with less use of agents. The tax authorities, in the 18 years that I'm here, 18 years ago it was really you had to know somebody at the tax office and he could help you if you helped him and all that kind of stuff. Right now it's a completely clear operation. I was last week at the head of the tax office and I was really surprised how professional it was there. It was really good. What is still an issue is a lot of laws, like Bettina already said in her introduction speech. The implementation is lacking. And that's especially the case for IP rights, and that's also for normal business practices when you want to sue somebody because he doesn't deliver according to the contract you have delivered. That's always a difficult and long process. And that's actually really one of the hiccups in normal business practices, because the legal system is not reliable. And that's one of the problems of Indonesia, and that needs to be fixed. But it goes too slow to my sense. But there might be some improvements in the coming years, I hope.
Okay, thank you. Bettina, what about IP though? Is that an issue?
It is always an issue, and this is actually a very interesting topic because it's actually been in the news quite recently. The president has got onto the bandwagon, and they're actually trying to protect the IP of Indonesian films. So the vice president was at a seminar 2 weeks ago, so pushing for the IP. They've set up, this is for films and for TV, and The Ministry of Justice has actually set up a department for IP specifically, and within that they have a cultural one, so they're really going to drive it. And likewise, there's a lot more cooperation between ministries. So you're seeing the Ministry of Law actually working with the Ministry of Communications. So for example, again, this is on TV. If you're stealing content and putting it on the website, the Ministry of Communication can actually take the website down without having to go back to the Ministry of Law. This is something we haven't had before. So the industry experts agree that the Indonesian regulations are good. We're in the 12-month period, so from passing a law, you then have 12 months to do an implementing law. So we're in that period at the moment, so we have to see what implementing laws come up. But the government is serious about IP. It's more serious in some areas like films, because that's nationalistic, it's culture. But they're probably a little bit less serious about some other issues where it's not being brought to their attention as much. But this is something that they're actually just starting to tackle in the last 2 months.
Okay, thank you. So lastly, what advice would you both give to international brands thinking of entering Indonesia then? Matt, can I ask you that question first?
My advice would be, Indonesia is a country full of chances and of course a lot of difficulties, otherwise it would have been overloaded already if it was very easy. So there are some barriers, and to understand them best, it would be best to get down here, talk to a partner like us, and help to find your way through to your sector and see how it is structured and what the main barriers are. And based on that, you can make your introduction plan or business plan, how you would like to do it. That can be any way. It can be that you appoint a good local distributor, you can start a joint venture, or maybe even completely from greenfield, start your own company, extend it into Indonesia. What you should not expect that it will be going very fast and easy. That's for sure not. It's a very big country. It has a lot of problems on itself. But what is there are 250 million people, and they are developing rapidly. They are getting richer every day, and therefore there are a lot of chances in the coming years. And if you want those chances, you have to be here.
Yeah, agree. Bettina, how about you? What advice would you give to international companies thinking of entering?
I think Matt said it all in a nutshell, and I think the one issue is we do have all the barriers, and I won't repeat those, but there's 250 million people down here. Can you afford not to be in Indonesia? Indonesia, just in context, Jakarta, the greater Jakarta city, 28 million people, is the size of Malaysia. Indonesia has the population and also the GDP of quite a few neighboring countries is equal to just one country down in Indonesia. So it should be a country that companies are considering very, very seriously, but once they're here, they have to understand the barriers. And if they understand the barriers, then they can be successful. It's the companies that don't understand the barriers that are not successful here. They're unable to anticipate them, and they're unable to deal with them.
Okay, thank you both. Well, I think we've just about timed out now, so all that leaves is for me to thank you, Matt, and thank you, Bettina, for joining us today, and also the listeners and viewers. Thank you so much. If you're interested in finding out more about doing business in Indonesia, then please contact us at consult@sannam4.com, or please contact us to our website, which is www.sannam4.com. So just to give you the email address again, it's consult@sannam4.com, or through the website www.sannam4.com. That's all from me for now, so thank you very much, and until next time, goodbye.